Both good and bad things came out of the practice of monkery, cappuccinos and clocks. What do you think the modern day monks of technology will bring us?
A sheep in wolf's clothing, cuddly and collectible. On top of that, I'm a little bit like a brother from medieval, a layman who knows what I'm talking about, here to offer peace and consolation to the flock of God. So welcome to Nuke Lutheran.
If I don't do this, I'm going to go crazy. So anyway, we're going to talk about metaphor. What is a metaphor? Okay, a metaphor is a figure of speech that gives us an understanding of one subject by using an other subject kind of as a model. And the reason it works is because both models will share certain traits or attributes of the other. So if you were listening in the intro, I used monks as a metaphor for scientists to highlight their almost religious devotion to the pursuit of technological progression in the world. Okay? And metaphor is important because in our day and age, it's a good way to communicate the gospel to people. But the one thing that I found lacking in the modern age is a modernized use of metaphor for the Bible and scripture. Now, let me just say, I'm not saying that there's something lacking in scripture, that the metaphors need to be updated. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, scripture must take precedence all the time, everywhere. Okay. Sola scriptura. I am not saying that we need to update biblical metaphors. I'm just saying that when communicating with a modern audience or someone who you're trying to talk to about Jesus, it's helpful to use modern metaphors. That's the goal. But the modern metaphor might be a way to help them understand what the Bible is teaching. Because when it comes right down to it, Christianity makes perfect scientific sense. It really does. And science seems to be playing catch up all the time. So that's why we're talking about metaphor. And let me give you a little example of what I'm talking about and how metaphor is used as an apologetic to describe truths of the Bible. I believe it was C.S. Lewis who originally did this. But then Tim Keller followed suit. And I'm going to add a little something to the metaphor that might make it even more enticing to a modern hearer. So, okay, the metaphor C.S. Lewis used was, let's say, okay, let's use Shakespeare. So how would Shakespeare tell Romeo and Juliet about himself? How would he say, hey, I'm the guy who created you, and I want you to know about me? How would Shakespeare alert characters in his story that he created them and that he created their whole story, their whole lives, everything in their world he created? How would he do this? Well, as Lewis pointed out, the only way for the author of a story, the author of characters, the giver of life to the entire world that they operate within could possibly communicate with them is if he wrote himself into the story. And so you see, this is perfect, a perfect biblical metaphor, don't you think? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He wrote himself into the story in the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ. Okay? And then Keller used the same thing, but he didn't use Shakespeare. He used the author of a story. But I think a really good way of talking about it with people today would be to just say, hey, how would J.K. Rowling tell Harry Potter that she created him? How? Well, she'd have to write herself into the story. So you see, I think this is a perfectly good use of metaphor to describe biblical truths, right? It's a fantastic way to describe it. Let me say this. Now, some of you may not have a mind or really care about what I'm about to say next, and that's fine. You can just use the metaphor, the J.K. Rowling apologetic, the Harry Potter, whatever. Don't have to go into this part. But if you want to go into this part, if somebody bucks against the idea that character in a story would perceive themselves as being real and not as a character in a story, and this is where I'm talking about modern science catching up a little bit. In the realm of quantum physics, their minds are completely open to the idea that someone in a story, a character in a story, could perceive themselves as in a story, could perceive themselves as in a world like ours and not as a character in a book. I believe quantum scientists have a mind for that. And if you wanted to look up Dr. Quantum and his teachings on Flatland on YouTube, fantastic. Talks about how characters in a two-dimensional world perceive things when characters from a three-dimensional world intrude upon it. Okay. And there are other quantum physicists who have said that, and I don't know what this means. I might have mentioned this in another podcast. I don't know what this means, but I've heard nutty stuff like, we're getting equations back from a 12th dimension. Like, what? 12th dimension? What are you talking about? So the possibility that words could create a world where those in that world would perceive themselves as in a world, not in a book. Do you get what I'm saying? Okay. These metaphors work. And modern science is starting to come to the point where it's open to the idea that the word could become flesh and dwell among us. Okay. They really are. Moving on. So, when the Industrial Revolution came about, and you can thank the monks really helped screw things up. With the clock. Most people don't know this, but monks invented the clock, and it was largely something they used to schedule out their prayers and their devotions and things like that, and their duties. As they were like squirrels in the machine squirrels in the machine. But by the time the Industrial Revolution rolls around, gears are everywhere. Gears are everywhere. So the metaphor, for the human mind became like, boy, that really got my cogs turning, and then electricity comes along and it's like the light bulb goes off in your head, right? So all these metaphors that seem to follow the course and the development of technology through the ages are pretty fascinating when you really think about it, right? Right? All the way from the cogs turning to the light bulb going off. And now, with especially with the 19th century, the dawning of like psychology and things like that, and a lot of abstractions of the mind, things became more intricate in the way we think about the mind. And we began to think about, as computers came around, you start to think about the mind as having hardware and software. It's not just gears. It's not just gears relying on weights or however they work, I'm not a watchmaker. But so, thinking about how metaphor has followed technology and that bringing us up to the present day. But let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about Dr. Frankenstein. Let's talk about him. Because with the discovery of electricity, this whole idea of reanimating a human became so enticing, that a story was written about it. And I was thinking about it, and I'm thinking about how is someone who's planning on doing like transhuman experiments or something like that any different from Dr. Frankenstein? Really, when you think about it, the only difference between someone who would be trying to incorporate humans into incorporate technology into the biology of a human is the intricate nature of the delivery of electricity. At least that's how my layman mind thinks about it, is that Dr. Frankenstein was using electricity like a club. He like big bolts, like a club, boiling the monster's brain like a lobster, right? And so if you think about it in the modern age with the implantation of a chip and things like that, we're still talking about electricity. We're still talking about, I don't know how it's going, but I don't know how to say it. It's like dry electricity versus neurochemical electricity. I don't think the technology is neurochemical. I think it's like chips and wires. So I think it's like, I don't know, I'm calling it dry electricity for lack of a better term. But when you think about it, think back to Dr. Frankenstein. Frankenstein, I think is how you say it. But, you know, other guys on YouTube have done commentaries on how human progress is an illusion, and it really is. The things that change are so transient, like, technology and things. So as we move forward, we really see there's no difference between the modern transhumanist and Dr. Frankenstein, right? So it's super interesting, and I'm going to bring that around this last little bit.
So let's start off. I told you I was going to bring this around. So guess what? I'm bringing it around. Metaphor. We're going to look at a passage of scripture here, and I don't think I'm the first that's come to this conclusion. And let me first say, this is a fictional account, not the biblical account is not the fictional account. I'm giving you my imagination here as far as scripture goes. I'm not a prophet. I'm not claiming to be a prophet. I'm just saying it's interesting to think about this passage of scripture in light of what we've been talking about here. It's interesting to think about. So let's read the passage, and then we're going to talk about it. All right? Here goes. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs, which he was granted to do. Okay, that's Revelation chapter 13, verses 11 through 14. Just imagine that at the time that this passage was written, and it doesn't matter whether you believe it was St. John the Apostle or some other John, because in light of the metaphors we've been talking about, when you really think about it, you have to wonder, what might he have thought the image was? It's easy to think of that as an idol, right? But I think it's a robot. I think that the beast, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, will find its way into a machine. And it's that spirit working through the machine that is the beast. The Antichrist creates a body for the beast. The beast inhabits it and rules the earth. So this beast is probably going to do some pretty amazing things in concert with the Antichrist. What will we think of next? How will we refer to our minds now? And as an addendum, let me add, I'm a fan of Elon Musk. I support the United States of America, and I support our president-elect. So the only similarities I really see between Elon Musk and the Antichrist is the fire coming down from the sky in the sight of men and doing many wonders. It could be a future rocketeer. But think about it. Think about it. If wouldn't you want to say to anyone, when you pray the Our Father, lead us not into temptation, I mean, the higher you climb in power and knowledge and technology, it seems to me the greater the need for that prayer to pass through a man's or woman's lips. So that's all I'm saying. It'd be crazy not to point it out. I mean, how else is fire going to come down from the sky in the sight of men? How else is a man going to control fire to come down out of the sky in the sight of men? These are just questions. Like I said, I fully support Mr. Musk, Elon Musk, and the entire Trump administration. They have my full support, And I'm not saying somebody's going to get a hold of this, chop it up, and make it look like I'm saying Elon Musk is the Antichrist. I'm not saying that. But anyway, hey, like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in to Nuke Lutheran.